Hello, this video lecture is going to serve as an introduction to GarageBand. So first things first, let's just open GarageBand. If you don't have GarageBand on your dock, you'll click on the Finder, go to Applications, and open it there. If you haven't downloaded GarageBand already, you can get it for free on any Mac from the App Store. You just search for GarageBand, make sure you have the most up-to-date operating system, and then it's a free download. So this is the first screen you see when you open GarageBand. The reason I had something else a moment ago is because I was working on a project recently, and GarageBand automatically opens your most recent project. But if you're opening GarageBand for the first time, this is what you'll see. Now the first question is, what is GarageBand? Well, GarageBand is a software program that allows you to record and edit audio. It's typically used as the recording program for a DAW, a digital audio workstation. So as you can see from here, you can work with keyboards, guitar amps, voice, hip hop, but this is actually a very limited picture of what GarageBand can do. But just to talk you through everything you're seeing, this empty project option is going to allow you to open a blank slate. Whereas if you were to click on keyboards, it would automatically open a bunch of different keyboard settings. And this is assuming that you have a keyboard connected to your computer with a USB cable. You play on your keyboard and those sounds show up in GarageBand with GarageBand's sounds, not the sounds of your keyboard. And this is great because the technology is such with modern electronic keyboards that every few years the sounds that were state of the art are all of a sudden obsolete. They sound dated and they no longer sound real to us as newer programs are able to create sounds that are closer to the original. Well, the nice thing about this is you can use a keyboard from really any time period, even 15, 20-year-old keyboards, as long as they have a USB or MIDI output, you can plug in here and use the most up-to-date sounds that GarageBand has. This one right here is an amp collection. This is very similar, allows you to use an audio interface where you plug your guitar directly in your computer without an amplifier or anything, just electric guitar straight in, and use a lot of the built-in amps. And what's really cool is they've modeled some of the most famous guitar tones throughout history. They have a Van Halen sound, they have a U2 sound, they have a Beatles sound. Then you get to voice. Again, if you open this up, it's just going to give you a lot of different vocal track plugins, which we'll get into in a minute. And for hip hop, so this one's assuming that you want to create a project that is largely reliant on electronic instruments, electronic drums, synthesizers, things of that nature. But you can access any of the instruments that open by default through these factory templates in the empty project. So for that reason, regardless of the type of project I want to work on, I always open an empty project. So I'm going to click on this, double click on that, and this is what opens up. Your opening screen here might look a little bit different. It's definitely going to have these options, but instead of a close-up green picture of some piano keys, it may look like an electric keyboard on a stand. This one may be an actual photo of a microphone. This one could be, instead of this blue kind of silhouette of a guitar, maybe an actual picture of a guitar, and this one could be a picture of a drummer. That represents the older versions of GarageBand. It's still going to work the same. They largely have the same capabilities. Things are just set up a little bit differently. But don't be alarmed if you see some different symbols than what I have in front of me here. If that is the case, you can just go to the App Store and update your current version of GarageBand for free, and you'll get the one that looks just like what I'm seeing. So now I want to just talk you through what I'm seeing. A lot of this lecture is just going to be explaining all the different things that are in front of you. So software instruments use MIDI. So what this means is, like I mentioned before, you take your electronic keyboard and use a USB cable, the exact same cable that you would use to plug your computer into a printer, and you plug it in your computer. There are two sides to a USB cable. There is the flat side that we typically think of for USB, like we'd use to plug our cell phone charger into the wall. Or there is the small, more square one. And the square side would go into your keyboard. The traditional looking USB would go into your computer. Now, MIDI is an acronym for Musical Instrument Digital Interface. It means you use a MIDI controller, typically what looks like a keyboard, a piano keyboard, an electronic keyboard, although sometimes it can also just look like an assortment of square buttons, and you assign different sounds to the different keys. So I can use a piano keyboard on an electronic piano, but I can have the sound be that of a violin, or a trombone, or a trumpet, or a guitar, or really any instrument you can think of. For audio, this is analog, whereas this is digital, and I'll get into that difference a little bit later, but this is used for an actual instrument or an actual voice. So anything you would record with a microphone, a human voice, or even if you were like miking a horn section, a real live horn section in your studio, you would use this option. Just means you're using a mic. Whereas if you were plugging a guitar, bass, or any other instrument that uses a 1/4-inch plug-in into an audio interface, you're going to go directly into this option, which opens up some amplifiers for you. Now, really, there aren't any fundamental differences between these two, except that this one is kind of catered towards human voice or instruments, and this one's catered to guitar. But if I opened up this option with a guitar plugged in, I could still access all the same sounds as on this one. I'd kind of take a different route to get there, and the reverse is also true. If I had this one opened up, I could record human voice or any other instrument. I would just take a different path to get there. These are only in place to help you get the results you want faster. And finally, the virtual drummer. Now, what's interesting about GarageBand is you can actually record drums 3 different ways, using software, MIDI, audio, or this virtual drummer. If you're recording drums with the audio, that would mean you have a drum set in the room and you've mic'd it up and you're just pushing play and you're recording the sound that that drummer produces. If you're using the software instrument, that means you would use your keyboard and you would have the different drums assigned to different notes on the keyboard. For example, one of the really low C's, usually C1 would be the bass drum, whereas E1 would be a snare drum, and F sharp would be a closed hi-hat, and perhaps G sharp would be an open hi-hat, and you would play the drums. You'd create any drum part you want using MIDI. But what's different is if you recorded a drummer with audio, you're very limited in what you can do to alter their performance afterward. If they messed up a rhythm, you essentially just have to re-record it or accept the bad rhythm. Yes, you can make some edits, you can splice tracks and move things around a little bit, but it's very cumbersome. And even if you're very good at it, it's still never going to sound as good as if they had just played it right the first time. Whereas with MIDI, you can make any sorts of changes you want. You can move just a hi-hat hit over by an 1/8 note, by a 64th note. You don't even have to go by notes. You can even think about it in seconds, 1 millisecond, 3 seconds, any amount of time you want. You just have a lot more control over editing a performance after it has been performed. Also, if you're using audio, this kind of assumes that you have a drum set that you want to record, that the drum set itself sounds good enough and that it's been tuned and that you have good cymbals and good sticks. Whereas, again, for a software instrument MIDI, you have access to amazing sounding drums. And I want to point out that this isn't synthesized drums. It's not created in the way that it once was in the 80s, 2000s, 90s, pretty much anything from, actually, let's just say 90s and earlier. I think it's a little bit safer that way. The way they used to synthesize sound was looking at the waveforms created by instruments and try to recreate those waveforms. And the product of that was you get a performance that kind of sounds like a trumpet or kind of sounds like a snare drum. Whereas today what we're doing when we use MIDI is there was a real drummer in a real studio that recorded the snare drum. And now, when we play a certain key on our piano, we hear that player's snare drum. And there's a term called velocity, which in music refers to the force with which a note was played. If a trumpet player were to exert a lot of air, play as loud as he or she can, that would be considered high velocity. If a pianist were to play a key on the keyboard with as much pressure as possible, that would be high velocity. Whereas if the piano player were to very gently push a note down, that would be low velocity. So the different velocities have also been recorded so that your performance on the keyboard or the MIDI drum set can actually sound like a real drummer. Anyway, that brings me to this last one, which is the virtual drummer. This one's very exciting. Essentially, you have a drummer in GarageBand whose performance you can adjust. And I'll get into that a little bit more once I actually open that up. You cannot open a GarageBand project without selecting one of these options. So I don't currently have a microphone or a guitar plugged into GarageBand, so I'm going to select software instrument. You'll notice that one option, this option down here, goes away. For your input, you want to use input 1, input 2, or both at the same time to create a stereo recording. That's something a little bit more advanced. We'll return to that idea later. But I do want to point out this option here. I want to hear my instrument as I play and record. Some people think this is helpful. Other people find it distracting. Part of that is just going to depend on what instrument you're playing. If you're plugging an electric guitar into GarageBand, and you're playing with distortion or with some other effects that will impact your playing, your performance, then you absolutely want to hear this. Just plug some headphones into your computer, click on this option here, and you'll hear that sound through the headphones as you play. Whereas singers sometimes don't want to hear their voice coming through the headphones. Either way, that's personal preference and it's up to you. My instrument is connected with. So the built-in microphone just means the microphone on your computer, the same microphone that you would use if you were recording video with Photo Booth or Skype or something. If you do have an audio interface, then you would click on this and it would pop up as an option for input device. I do not currently have an interface hooked up, so it's not showing up. But if I did, like an M Audio or a Scarlett Focusrite, that would be an option I could click on. And then I want to hear sound from. This is where you're sending the sound to. So I'm actually going to send the sound to this program that I'm using to record right now so that you'll hear everything. So output device, Movavi. So that should mean, and we'll find out soon enough, but it should mean that when I make sound on the keyboard, in GarageBand using a keyboard, that it's going to pop up. And I'll see a signal here. I'll come back to that though. All right, so anyway, let's jump in. So now you finally made it to the main page that you're going to use to work for the entire time that you're using GarageBand. I'm going to begin by closing everything, and I'm going to talk you through what everything is. Okay. As you're exploring GarageBand, this question mark is really going to be helpful for you. If you click on that, what it does is anytime you drag your cursor, it's going to just tell you what the cursor is currently over. So if you're curious as to, oh, I wonder what that icon that looks like a tuning fork is, well, let's find out. It's the tuner button, which would mean if I was using audio, if I had a microphone, or if I was using a built-in microphone, I could click on that and a guitar tuner, or I mean not a guitar tuner, just a tuner would pop up and I could use that to tune any instrument, of course, including a guitar. So we may come back to this, but generally this is helpful to have turned on when you're getting acquainted with GarageBand, but it can be somewhat distracting once you're familiar with GarageBand and you're trying to work. So if you want that turned off, just click on the question mark. All right, so this represents the current instrument, and this is the field. So one thing that's kind of cool is you don't actually need to have your own keyboard hooked up to GarageBand. It's very helpful, but you don't need one. If you go to Window, Show Musical Typing, I've got this keyboard here. So now I can check Movavi to make sure I'm actually getting a signal. Okay, I think we are. If not, I'll have to re-record the whole video. So let's hope that it's working. All right, anyway, so I'm going to pull that back up. And it's going to give me sound that matches this instrument, electric piano. And I can use my mouse to click on these, or I can put my fingers on the computer keyboard like that. I can cycle through octaves. and I can play like that. If I want to record, I just click on this record button. And that performance was recorded. Now I can play it back. This window here shows you which measure you're in, which beat. So right now I'm on beat 1 of measure 5. You can double click on that and change it to snap the playhead, which is this line right here. This is just wherever you're currently working. You can snap that back to any given spot, or you can click and drag it. Another option, just click anywhere and it'll automatically put it there. You'll notice right now it's displaying measures in groups of 2. If I move this around, I can make it wider to see measures or smaller to see groups of 5. And you can find any area in between. Personally, I like to find that sweet spot where I can see all of the measures, but when I just barely got to the point where it displayed every measure. Tempo, can just, if you want to change the tempo of a song, double click that, push enter. Now it's at 100, so if I play that performance back, meter, click on that, you can choose a different meter, and the key that you're playing in. And this one allows you to go back and forth between displaying in beats and displaying in time. So maybe you just want seconds. If you're recording music, you probably want measures and the key and things like that. But if you're recording a podcast or an audiobook, then perhaps just the timestamp is more useful for you. This is the tuner. Again, this only works when we have an audio track, and right now I only have my software instrument, so that's not displaying yet, but it will display as soon as I open an audio track. Click on this one, and now I can open the tuner. If I wanted to delete a track, let's say I thought I wanted this, but I changed my mind. I just click on it so it's highlighted, push delete. This button right here is a count-in. So if that's deselected and I push record, it just starts recording instantly from wherever I had the playhead. But if I want to have a minute to prep or to hear the tempo, this is especially useful if you're coming in right on the downbeat, you turn this on and you go up here to record, and you can have no count-in, a 1-bar count-in, or a 2-bar count-in. Very useful tool. This one right here is the metronome. The metronome takes effect both while you're recording and while you're just playing. So if I push play, we hear that metronome. If I turn that off, it's still playing, but the metronome is no longer there. This right here is your master volume. You click and drag that around, and you'll notice it's measuring in dB. dB stands for decibels. So what that means is at whatever volume, whatever decibel level a performance was recorded at, if you slide this up, it adds volume, increases the decibel rating, or it can decrease volume to lower the decibel rating. Now, this one is just for notes. These are just some notes that you can type about a song. For example, let's say you're doing some editing and you want to remember, oh, I need to fix the chorus on the guitar or something. You can put a note here, just like that. You click on that and the notes are hidden again. This feature right here is for loops. Now a loop, this is something that I'm going to explain more in the next video, but essentially a loop is a pre-recorded musical excerpt on a variety of instruments and a variety of settings that you can search up here. You can have different parameters and different filters, so you can look for only percussion, or you can search by genre or descriptors. But it's a short little melody. This tells you how many beats it is. Some of them are blue and some of them are green. The difference is that blue is audio and green is MIDI, and this is true for all of Apple's music products. GarageBand, Pro Tools, and Logic. MIDI, again, it's digital music. It's something that you can change after the fact. It's all in binary code, and you can make little alterations to the music that will be reflected. And with MIDI, as you saw earlier when I demonstrated changing the tempo, because this was MIDI, I changed the tempo and it plays this slower. Whereas had I recorded audio that speed, it's not the same. You can't just change the speed of it. Now you can play it faster, but that's not the same thing. It sounds different when you play it faster compared to MIDI. So generally speaking, when you're dragging audio in, you should make sure that the parameters for the project are set the way you want them, that you have the right tempo, the right meter, the right key. Because with MIDI, you can change your mind on that stuff after the fact. With audio, you're much more limited with post-production changes or post-recording changes. But once you find one that you like, just cancel out of that. Once you find one you like, you just literally drag it in to this area where it says drag Apple loops here, anything on the bottom here. I'm going to get rid of this one because that was just kind of me demonstrating how you would play notes. So now I'm going to go back to the beginning and listen to that. It's a pretty cool beat, but it's very short. The way you make these beats longer is you loop them. That's where the term comes from. So if you move your cursor to the top right corner, you can click and drag it and drag this to be as long as you want. So now I have 8 full bars of that beat. Now let me find something else to go with it. How about some bass? That sounds cool. So now the question is, do I want the bass to come in right with the drums, or do I want to come in a little bit after? If I wanted it to come right with the drums, I would just drag it there. And I could play it and hear how it sounds together. But let's say I wanted either the bass or the drums to not start right at the beginning. Well, if I put the cursor in the bottom left corner, it gives me this shape here. This is called the trim tool. Click and drag that, and let's say I want the drums to come in on, I don't know, anywhere really. Let's say beat 4 of the second measure. And in the same way that I can click and drag the MIDI loop, I can click and drag the audio loop to wherever I want it. Now what if I only wanted it to take up, I don't know, let's say 1.5 beats. Can I do that? Well, let's find out. I'm going to click on this loop icon again to hide that so I have more room in this area to work. And I'm going to use this tool to zoom in a little bit more so I can really see the middle. So as I think I said 1.5 beats, right? So that means right there is where I want the bass to stop. So I click and drag that to right there. So now I'm only going to get 1.5 beats in that measure. There you go. And I can add as many loops as I want to. And if I wanted to, let's say I wanted to put a break in here. So I didn't want this to just stop, but I wanted to stop for a minute and come back in. Let's say I don't want the bass on measure 5. Well, I can zoom back out a little bit, have a little bit more room to work here. So I'm going to take the playhead and put it here. Again, there are 3 ways to get the playhead there. I can double click here, 5, enter, or I can click somewhere and the playhead will go there, or I can click and drag. So again, what I wanted to do is I want to create I want to create a 1 measure rest in this performance here. Well, I'm going to click on this one. This means I've highlighted it, I've selected it. The keyboard shortcut for this is Command T. If I push Command T, it just broke that into two separate pieces, and I can move them around. Now I could just click and drag that to measure 6, but let's say I don't want to do it that way. If I have this highlighted, which it is, and push Command T again, then I broke another piece, and I can just get rid of that one. What if I want a little pickup? Well, I can put this here, and right there, it comes in on the and of 4. So now let's hear what this sounds like from the beginning again. It's going to start with the bass. Drums come in on beat 4 of measure 2. Most of measure 5 is a rest, but on the and of 4, the bass comes back in, they play together, then the bass finishes at beat 1, or sorry, at the start of beat 2 of measure 8, and the drums keep going to the end of measure 8. Let's hear what that performance sounds like. Now I noticed that the drums are a little bit quieter than the bass. Well, this right here is your volume. So I'm just going to make the bass a little bit quieter. I'm going to go all the way down to 0. They had boosted it quite a bit. And I want to make the drums a little bit louder. Let's hear how that sounds different. I think I like that balance a little bit better. So I was using this volume control here, and you'll notice that as it's playing, you have these green, yellow, and orangish red lines that pop up. That's called your limiter. This represents sound. As long as the sound is green, that means you're good. It sounds good, it's at a regular volume where it's not going to do what's called clipping. Clipping is when the sound is so loud that it's actually distorting and it's starting to sound bad. Green means you're fine, yellowish orange means you're approaching the point where it's going to start to sound bad, and red means it sounds bad right now. It's currently happening to you. You may need to scrap that recording. So I'm going to play that again so you can see this limiter at work. So that's already pretty high in the orange, right? I'm going to click and turn that down a little bit. A little bit of yellow is okay. Now that looks better. Now, sometimes though, you just want more volume. Well, there are a few different ways you can get that that extra volume. But one rule of thumb is as long as it's not distorting, yes, you can move this up here, even if it looks like it might be clipping. And technically, it wasn't ever red, it was just orange, so this is still okay. But that's what this means. This is mostly important when you're recording audio. It doesn't matter for loops as much because for the loop, you can always change this. But for audio, if the gain was too high when you recorded it, then it could always be distorted. It could always be clipping. And the term distortion, yeah, it sounds good for guitar, but you don't want distorted vocals. You don't want a distorted French horn. So distortion is usually a bad thing. It's something that you want to be in control of. And this last tool here is the media tool. So if you click on this, it's going to automatically open iTunes. And you can take any MP3 file that you have in iTunes and you could drag it in here and you could work with it. That's something else that I'm going to show you in a different video lecture. So now you've seen some MIDI, you've seen some audio. I've showed you how to record MIDI using that built-in keyboard up here that I had, but you could do the same thing if your keyboard was plugged into with a USB cable. Although I will point out that depending on the brand and the model of the keyboard you're using, you may have to get what's called a driver. A driver is something, it's a program that you would download for free from the website of the manufacturer, for example, Yamaha or Casio, whatever company it is, and it just allows your computer to communicate with that MIDI controller. Again, it's free, it's pretty easy to find. If you just type in, for example, if I have a Yamaha YZ125, I would just go to Google, type in Yamaha keyboard YZ125 download driver, and it's probably going to take me there. And I would click on, well, if you're using GarageBand, you're certainly using a Mac, so you would click on Mac download. Although if you were using Pro Tools or Mixcraft or something like that, you could then, of course, download it for the PC driver. I'm going to show you how to record audio. So I'm going to need to open up a new audio track. And let's say I want a count in. I want to have a moment before I start needing to record, which is great if, again, if you have a vocal performance that starts right on the downbeat. I'm going to make sure my count in is turned on right there. And if I want to stay even, I could turn this on as well. When I'm ready to record, I would put headphones on. Now, instead of using headphones, I'm just going to turn this to 0. But if you plugged headphones in, you could record your audio and still hear. The only problem is you don't want to use the regular speakers of your computer to record audio while something else is playing, because your computer microphone or your external microphone is going to pick up not only the sound of your voice or your instrument, but also the sounds coming out of the computer. And they would then be double layered, and that leads to feedback. So you definitely don't want that. So I've just turned that off to kind of get around the problem. So I'm going to push this record button. And now I'm recording. I can say whatever I want. I can give any recording I want. But you'll notice this isn't picking up. There's nothing there. That means it's not taking sound from the right spot. This is something that you probably won't have to deal with more than once, but just in case it does happen to you, the way you get around that is you go up to GarageBand, Preferences, Audio, Input Device, built-in microphone, or wherever you want to receive sound from. Could be an audio interface, M-Audio, Scarlett, Focusrite, something like that. So now when I do this again, it should work out. Testing, testing. You'll see these wave regions here, so I know my performance is working. You'll see that it's mostly green with just a hint of yellow, so I'm at a good volume. But if I talk really loud, it starts to turn yellow or orange. Now I'm going to clap my hands just to show you what happens when it maxes out. This might be kind of loud. Fair warning. You'll see a few things happened. I'm going to pause that using the space bar. That maxed out all the way. And also, the waves reached all the way to the top. So those may not sound very good when we listen back to them, but let's find out. I'm going to turn my volume back on. And again, you're going to ignore this step. You're just going to use your headphones. You're going to plug your headphones into your computer. All right, I'm going to push this back to the beginning, and let's hear how my audio combined with my loops sounds. Testing, testing. You'll see these wave regions here, so I know my performance is working. You'll see that it's mostly green with just a hint of yellow, so I'm at a good volume. But if I talk really loud, it starts to turn yellow or orange. Now I'm going to clap my hands, just to show you what happens when it maxes out. This might be kind of loud. Fair warning. And there you go. You see that. You'll see a few things happen. I'm going to back that up so you can see that it was indeed clipping. It just means it's going to sound distorted again. Be kind of loud. Keep your eye up here. Fair warning. We're getting full red. You'll see a few things happen. That clipped. So just a few other things on this initial introduction to GarageBand. When I clicked on this track here, I get all these other controls I can edit. I can adjust the EQ, I can add compression, I could add reverb, any other number of sounds. I have another tuner down here. I can go to the EQ if I wanted to do some very in-depth alterations by frequency. I can do that. So if I click and drag, I can raise certain frequencies. This isn't something you do too often. I normally do it to boost certain frequency ranges more so than to adjust to adjust the sound of an instrument. For example, one time I took an audio recording from 1971, and I did this 2 years ago, so it's pretty old at this point. It was almost 50 years old, and the audio had a lot of static and noise. So what I did in order to make the person's voice more audible is I isolated the frequency ranges where the static was the loudest, and I just lowered those frequencies. Then I found the frequencies where the woman's voice was the loudest, and I boosted those frequencies. So I was able to make it so that I could hear what I wanted to hear a little bit better. Again, that's very obscure, and I think it's highly unlikely that you'll run into that issue where you have to do something like that. But that's just one example of why this is beneficial to know how to do. I can get rid of this by either double-clicking up here on any one of the wave regions. It makes that go away, or I can click on this scissor icon. This icon here pulls back to that one. So the main difference is this one would let me do micro edits. It's kind of just a zoomed in version of this one up here. And I can click and drag that if I want to see that better. Excuse me. Or that one's the sound. It's pretty clear that this one it's scissors, you're editing, whereas on this one it's controls because it looks like the knob for an amp. Finally, this one here, this last option, allows you to adjust the sounds. Now for audio, you can affect the sounds for the voice. You can put these different vocal plugins. Plugins are pre-recorded sound effects that it's not just one effect. It's not just delay or just equalizer or volume boost or something like that, but it's a combination of effects that the creators of GarageBand think a lot of musicians and music producers would use. So I highly suggest you cycle through here, you record your voice doing something, and then we use this icon here. So this is cycle. It just means whatever's in this yellow region, it's going to keep cycling through that. And you can click and drag either side, and you can just keep listening to whatever that was. So for example, my performance is working. You'll see that it's mostly green with just a hint of yellow. My performance is working. You'll see that. You want to make sure you turn that off when you're done with that though.